Okay, finally, there we go. We are finally live. Sorry about that, you guys. Rural internet, that's why we need that broadband. So we have a very special event for you guys today. It's on our next, series of the community town hall. Oh, you don't hear my echo there. So again, if we can't see who's watching unless you put something in the comments, so throw an emoji in there, throw a comment in there, and we will see you. Hey, Nancy. Part of running for office, the best part actually, is you get to hear everyone's stories. You get to call people that you have never met before, or maybe you're reconnecting with, and hear people's stories and figure out how you can help them. And I've been really fortunate to have had a lot of these, thousands of these. And we're fortunate to be joined by Katie today, who's going to share her story with you guys about healthcare. And then I have another one after that. So you guys get to hear what I get to hear on the phones and what motivates me to run for office and try to make a difference in people's lives. So Katie, I'll let you introduce yourself and I will mute myself and have at it.
Thanks, Addie. Thanks for having me. My name is Katie Kohler, and I live in Victoria with my husband and our almost 2-year-old son. And I have been involved in Addie's campaign for a little while now, and I'm excited to be here to share this story because I think that this story is pretty common for a lot of people with healthcare. So last fall, I changed jobs. And when I changed jobs, there was a waiting period before my insurance kicked in at my new job. And with a baby, we had already hit our out-of-pocket maximum on our old insurance. And then we had to go on Cobra for about 2 months until my new insurance kicked in. And then at that point, we had to start our large deductible all over. And you can't just not have insurance with a baby, of course. So when we added up the Cobra payments and the additional amount out of pocket that we spent on the new insurance, it cost us somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000 for me to change jobs, which I think is just absolutely crazy. And we were fortunate enough to be able to pay for that through a couple of years of HSA savings. But I mean, not everyone is fortunate enough to have those kinds of savings accounts, and certainly not, with that much money in it. And it wiped out years of our savings there. And I just don't think that that should have to happen. I think that that prevents people from changing jobs. I think that that slows economic mobility for workers. And I just don't think it's very fair.
Oh, there we go. Yes, I totally agree. And I'm sure everyone's heard my healthcare story, my mom's healthcare story over and over. And it's just a very common theme that we're hearing a lot in the community, and how we can fix it a couple different ways, I think, is expanding Minnesota Care would be a great first step so people have an option. But eventually just getting to a point where your healthcare is not tied to your job and you don't have a gigantic cost to switch a job. I think that's just criminal, honestly. So, all right, we're not getting any questions in the comments yet. I'll give it another second. If anyone has any questions for Katie and myself, please let us know. Otherwise, we'll let you hop off and yeah, I'm not getting anything. So great.
All
well,
right,
thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And you guys have a great rest of your day.
Yep, you too. Bye.
Thank you. All right, so our next community story that I'm really fortunate to be able to share is a good friend of mine, Zach, who is recovering or has recovered from COVID. So I'm going to screen share. He was not able to join us in person, well, virtually today, so he sent a video. So I'm going to get that going here. Okay, maybe. Of course, you guys, technical difficulties. All right, so instead of showing you the video, we will post it on our Facebook page. Sorry about that, you guys. just really brief, quick synopsis of it. It's about a 7-minute video. I really encourage you to all to watch it. Okay. So he has a pre-existing condition and unfortunately was diagnosed with COVID, came down with COVID, and it was just a horrible recovery and very scary, and had a lot of uncertainty in how to recover from that, how to deal with it, and what to plan for and what to expect. And there's just, at that point, there was not enough information about the virus. And really, honestly, there still isn't. And it's made him become a healthcare voter, very focused on, voting for folks that will protect people with pre-existing conditions like himself, like me, like my mom. And it's very similar to what, we have dealt with, and, what a lot of you have dealt with as well. So while we're waiting for our next couple guests to come on here, I can share a couple different more stories with you. This is honestly the best part about running for office. So I spoke with a guy in Mayor or Watertown, I can't remember, but he was a retired veteran who was on disability and saw a need in our for housing, affordable housing in our county. It's something that we typically don't really talk about a lot here, and we definitely should. So his life dream and goal that he shared with me was to build and run affordable housing, sober living housing for veterans and their families. And he had the whole process, worked out how he was going to afford to do this and maintain it and run it. And it was just so moving to hear someone so passionate about something that I could potentially help with as well. He sees a need for affordable housing in the community and wants to do something about it on his own dime. And he was talking about being on disability, and there's some strange limitations with how much money you can have in your account in order to qualify for certain programs. And it needs a little work. So he was telling me how he wanted to, get a job and work and build up his wealth so he could do this for the community, and was really struggling with that. Definitely something that the state legislature can help with. We've heard a ton about the kind of pitfalls of the referendum failing in Eastern Carver County schools. Now, Waconia has an operating levy, and I have a great video we're going to share on the campaign page about that. So what has been happening to students as they're trying to return to school, doing distance learning, and they're, going from 7 learning periods to 6, and they're losing a lot of their teachers that they were really, beloved teachers. And it's really unfortunate. And, folks all across the aisle are feeling the downfalls of that and feeling the effects of that. So, I'm not pro referendum. I'm pro the state helping us prevent a referendum from having to happen. So if you get things like the voucher program, or legislature is basically starving the public education system, that creates a need for referendums or cuts, and no one wants that. No one wants to vote. No one wants our referendums. No one wants our property taxes to go up. No one wants to vote against a referendum for our kids. We just shouldn't be in that situation in the first place, and that's something that the Minnesota State Legislature is actually constitutionally required to provide. Is to maintain a general public education that is quality and effective, no matter what district you're in or what zip code you have. So we're not holding up our end of the bargain there. So I can't wait to get in there and make some changes. All right. His story was just in the Chaska Herald. Am I correct? Nancy, I'm not sure if it is. We should find it and put it on the website or on the social media. Oh, thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. It's fun to hear everyone's stories and figure out how I can help. And it makes me love this community so much more. And it makes me so much more driven to see what I can do. This isn't about me, putting my name on a sign or, having an office at the Capitol. This is about me using my knowledge, my experience, my privilege to get in there and do stuff for my community and help my community, which is what I've always wanted to do. I mean, Carver County made me who I am today. Carver County raised me, essentially. So, the thought that someone might want to move here and settle down and raise their kids here, and those kids might not have the same opportunities that I did, it's unacceptable in my eyes. I think this is the greatest county in the nation, and we should be able to, afford that opportunity and experience to everyone else who wants to be here. So here's a question. If the legislature is constitutionally required to provide an education, how can they get away with not fully funding public education? Well, that is a great question that I would love to ask. It was the legislature originally under the Plenty administration that started to gut the education system. And I actually spoke with a gentleman yesterday. We talked a lot about this, that a public education system can't run the same as like a free market marketplace. Basically, we can't, you can't get your Walmarts and your Targets and starve out the little guys in the public education system. And I think throughout the years, it's trended more towards that. It doesn't work. It's not constitutionally required. And I don't think there has been a lot of challenges. The people that would take that case to the Minnesota Supreme Court are more interested in trying to lobby and pull us back in the correct direction than try to drag it out in court, would be my guess. The folks that are for fully funding public education are some of the hardest working groups at the legislature. And some of the toughest actually to work with, which is by design. They're tough. They're set in what their beliefs are, and they want to help you get to that. Legislators get to that point, but they're not willing to compromise. And you get a lot of that at the legislature, and that is not a knock on them by any means. I am a huge fan of a lot of those groups that I get to work with through the Higher Education Committee. It's admirable, and it's clear what they stand for, and they're easy to work with in the sense that where they're coming from, but tough in that they don't want to compromise. So one of my law school professors in my negotiation class said, a good negotiation ends when nobody is 100% happy. And I've always kind of thought about that through my legislative work and negotiation work and stuff. You're going to have to compromise a little bit here and there, as long as you're prioritizing the right things and getting done the right things, then you're good. Actually, on that note too, we're just checking comments here. On that note too, the legislature finally passed a bonding bill. We have a bonding bill now. It's a good one. I'm not mad about it. Let me pull up my list here of what is in it. There's some pretty exciting stuff. So it's about a 1 point, where are we at? You guys, here we go. Okay, 1.9 billion. 1.3 of that is 1.36 is a general obligation bonding, which is pretty typical standard procedure, and 31 of that is in supplemental general fund. So a lot of that is going to go towards roads, bridges, water treatment plants, parks and trails, improvements to state buildings, improvements to college campuses. That was a big one that I was able to work on a lot, actually. And they gave $55 million for bus rapid transit, which is a huge improvement. Minnesota State Systems got $91 million. University of Minnesota got $29 million for like a R&D development of a child medicine research center, which is unprecedented as well. And about $75 million for their other asset preservation requests. They were able to fund enough to keep 2 corrections facilities open that were about to close, and it was going to be a disaster. They were able to fund enough to the BCA to get rape kit testing done. I'm sure some of you remember that. Was it Star Tribune that did a series on it, on all of these leftover rape kits that have never been tested for years. So we were able to fund enough to get all those finished and tested. The other thing that I'm very, very excited about is the tax. There was a tax portion to, what's the word I'm looking for? Conform to the United States federal tax code. Section 179 is very specific. We talked a little bit about it in our agriculture town hall last week, and we were able to pass that. So that is a huge help to small businesses and farmers that are looking to, get new equipment and trade things in. And it's a lot easier for Minnesotans to navigate when that conformity is existing. So we were able to get that finished as well. Do you know what portion of the bonding bill will go to Carver County? It's hard to say, because there was some stuff that went to like a general, like the Met Council, they could decide to spend here. but it's not guaranteed that they will. So there's a couple things like that. I think the last I heard from Senator Kent was that 7% of the funding was coming to Carver County. So it's really unfortunate. We actually had a House representative vote against it for some reason, but the other two voted for it. So that's great. The bill ended up passing the House on 100 to 34. So we had 25 Republicans come over and vote with the Democrats on that to 34 in the House. And then I believe only 3 senators voted against it, which is great to see. A lot of that is tough, long negotiations, working across the aisle. You know, the Democrats didn't want to put the tax stuff in there. Republicans didn't want to put a lot of other stuff in there, the spending, and there was a lot of nonsense with amendments and things that didn't need to happen. Honestly, happened because it was an election year and people wanted to make speeches. So, but it's done, and I'm very excited that I don't have to talk about that anymore. And what a dereliction of duty that has been for the legislature to sit on for special sessions. So, all right, let's go on to our second half, which is going to be a conversation on anti-racism. And I am joined by 2 incredible special guests, and I will let them both introduce themselves because you guys are going to do yourselves more justice than I am. So you guys just want to go through and introduce yourselves, where you're from, what kind of work you do, and yeah. So I don't know who wants to go first.
You want to go, Grecia?
You can go first.
Hi, I'm Amanda Flowers Peterson. I live in Chanhassen, Minnesota. I have 2 school-age boys, which makes me really excited to be here today. I identify as a cisgender female Black woman. And so, you know, that means that my sons are Black. And so the conversation around anti-racism is very important to me, and I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you. All right.
I am Grecia Lozano. I am actually a Mexican immigrant. I live in Chaska, Minnesota. I actually have been living here for the past 21 years, which is the amount of time I've been in the US. So my whole life in the US has been here in Chaska. I have a 9-year-old daughter who's daughter of both Mexican parents. So she, even though she is an American citizen, she considers herself Mexican by ethnicity. And I mean, having grown up in here as an immigrant and as a minority, again, racism has been one of the hot topics in this county for many, many years. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation as well. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you both for being here. I'll be really honest, 2020 was the first major time in my life where I had to internally reflect and see where I'm at in my journey on anti-racism. Well, you guys know 2020 has been quite a ride, but systemic racism has existed my entire life, all of our entire lives. We kind of ignored it until now, and we're having a big reckoning. So I think this conversation is something that I know I have not had a lot in my past years until I started running for office. And now this is quite a common topic to talk about, which is a great improvement, but we still have a long, long way to go. So when we were planning this conversation, we talked about doing the typical like interview style kind of stuff. And that's not going to work. I think you were right, Amanda, that's been played out. And we know, definitions and surface level conversations are a little basic at this point, honestly. So I'm really excited to dive a little deeper into this. So instead of asking, questions and doing the whole interview style thing, we'll talk a little bit about how it plays into what I've learned about myself and about my position running for office, and how state senators can really help drive this conversation forward and keep improving. All right, let me get over to my notes here. So first, here is what anti-racism means to me and how I plan to further this conversation as a state senator. First, I've learned that it is not enough to just not be racist or think that you're not racist. And it's not enough to be silent. You have to be actively anti-racist. So that means things like looking for opportunities to further facilitate these kind of conversations on systemic racism, blatant racism, any way that we can continue to further that conversation and normalize that conversation with everybody that we need to. And continuously looking for ways to use my platform to elevate voices that have been leading on this for decades. I don't feel like it's my place to come in and say, I'm a white girl from the suburbs and I know how to fix all this stuff, but it is my job to use that privilege to elevate the voices that do know all the answers and listen, actively, actually listen. Be intentional about equity considerations in legislation. So I talk a lot about how my friend Kali Her is a representative in St. Paul. She taught me about equity considerations in every piece of legislation. So not necessarily a really direct and blatant one, but something like requiring a demographic analysis in environmental impact studies that the MPCA does. You can always use an equity lens to look at every piece of legislation. So being intentional about that. And last is calling out racism and injustices on the floor, in committees, in the halls of the Capitol. And that's something that people have started to do a lot. You've seen a lot of videos of the Posse Caucus and others being really effective in that. But it is time that our, being a white ally to do the same thing, whether that's in committee discussions, negotiations, whatever that might be. So I will open the floor up for you two to respond.
Grecia, you look like you're about to hit it first. We're going to do this the whole time. Addie, you want to go first since you made me go first in the intro?
Oh, if I knew you were going to call that card, I wouldn't have let you go first. Oh gosh, where to start? Yeah, I mean, like you said, this is the very first time that we are seeing these issues being addressed. So it takes a lot of courage, Addie, to take that step and openly speak about how you're going to address racism. Very often we get a lot of candidates, especially lately, reaching out to me and Amanda and other people in our community, asking for our support, but very, very little times do we hear blunt statements of how this is going to happen. So first of all, I highly appreciate that you're taking that step farther and that you're not simply saying, so can I just get you to back me up here? Because it definitely takes a huge toll on me and on our communities, to be honest, to back someone up without actually getting some content on how this is going to be addressed. And our communities, especially speaking specifically from the Latino community, is a community that's often being blindsided when it comes to racism talks, because very often our vulnerability, with a huge part of our community being undocumented, the reality is we don't have a platform that is being set up for us to be able to speak about the experiences that we suffer without having some sort of consequence hanging in front of us. And it is very real. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. I'm being super vulnerable right now because of my situation as well. And so just knowing that that we have someone who is willing to set foot forward and not just say, I will be here, but actually express how that is going to happen has been a huge blessing for us. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you.
Hard to follow, Grecia. So first and foremost, yeah, I really appreciate you. One, just if I can have it be publicly said, I am a cut it straight, tell it like it is kind of person, and am slowly but surely embracing that about my personality. And so first and foremost, I really appreciate that I was able to provide that feedback, because often people be like, give us feedback, and then you're straightforward. And then culturally, normatively, that means they want it packaged very passively. And I end up being countercultural and being labeled as something different, but you were really receptive to it. So thank you. And I appreciate even the shout out. So, well, I think one of the things that has been frustrating for me, so I'll speak to what I love that you did different today, is the fact that me telling you my definition of anti-racism, I'm not going to be in office. I'm hoping to elect you to represent me. And so I need to know what you're going to do. And so Grecia said this too. It's really difficult when we don't have the content on how you're going to do that. And then it's very, I speak for myself, but I'm sure many minorities can relate. When we elect someone, we're really excited about them, and then they get into the moment and we're like, what? Whoa, what happened? Like, that's not what I expected at all. Also want to give acknowledgement to, you said a lot of stuff, and, you know, I mean, you were being condensed, right? I mean, the anti-racism work is not for the faint of heart, you know, but similar, if we try to make sure we look at it in a human nature point of view, similar to being a mother. It's not easy to take on that role. Being a spouse in a committed relationship. All of these roles require a lot of sacrifice, a lot of work, and they are tiresome, but the outcomes, if done with integrity and transparency, are beautiful. And so what I think anti-racism is, and I kind of shared this a little bit privately with you, but I really think it is just confronting racism every time you see it. And you mentioned that. And so we are in alignment with that. And then I would say, I would encapsulate what you showed today that I personally add as an expectation, which is consistent humility. Consistently being open to feedback and being challenged and being open to just readjusting. If you saw in your past that you've struggled with anti-racism ideals, then don't make a person of color have to do these like emotional circus experiences with you to try to prove to you that this time you did it again. Like, just embrace it, be humble, redirect, and give the minority community an opportunity to say, hey, we're fully behind you, because you're always shifting and growing. And so I'm really excited to see how you continue to show us that you're willing to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Just a couple comments that are coming in on the Facebook. A lot of thank you both for being here, and great to see yous. Yeah, all right. Pull it again here. So we want to know why it's important for state senators, not just U.S. senators and the president and U.S. Congress people, but why is it important at the state level and the local level to be anti-racist? One of my very good friends now, I met her through the Capitol work, is a lobbyist, and she put it best. She recognized that she is an educated white woman with a law degree who is charming and has a lot of, ability to get into spaces that other people can't. So instead of working for a large firm where they just give her a client and you have to lobby for them, she started her own business and made it a big cornerstone of her business to seek out people, businesses or activist groups or whatever it might be that don't have that privilege and can't necessarily afford a big time fancy lobbying firm, and lobby for them, lobby for what's right. And I feel very, very much the same way. I know that I have, experience and relationships that I've built out over the past 2 years that will be helpful in legislating. And I need to use that privilege to further the interests and the protections of all of my constituents, not just a party, not just a group. Every single person in Carver County, I need to look out for them and elevate your voices as much as I possibly can using what I've got, basically. Anything to add to that? We'll have Amanda go first. We'll just keep switching you guys.
Turns, all about fairness in this here forum. So I just have an additional question. And so are you paralleling that story to your dedication to what you plan on doing if you were elected? Just like that's a passion and a drive behind what you're doing.
Definitely.
That is pretty amazing. I think one of the things that is hard to ignore, to see happening far more than it should, is the fact that people will get elected and then you find out what their agenda really was. And so to hear that your agenda is you're an educated, beautiful white woman, and you're still choosing to selflessly go after for the agenda of being able to make sure voices and people who do not have access to the table get that access, I think that's profound. And so that's my only ad. Like that is exactly what I, representing a Black woman, would want in a state senator.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. That's actually why I got into politics in the first place, because I knew I had that law degree, that education, that, kind of aggressive drive to get things done. And that's, why I'm here, and seeing and hearing more stories every day of people who don't have access and who don't have a seat at the table. It's just more and more unacceptable to me. So definitely something I'll drive towards. Do you want to add anything, Grecia?
I was just thinking back to kind of the original comment on why it's important for this to be lobbied at the state level. I think nationally there's a lot that gets lost because it just seems like it's so big and so out there, that when we're talking about stuff that's happening at a state level, it's things that affect you more. It just seems like it affects you more. It hits closer to home. Is really what I'm looking for. And I think especially for the Latino community, this is very true. Very little happens at a national level with the Latino community. Very little help, very little support, very little talks about racism, especially when it comes to the presidency and their views on the Latino community. And so I feel like it's important not only to talk about it at a national level, but also at a state level, and how this affects our community locally, how this is affecting our schools, how this is affecting our children, how this is affecting our, not only the immigrant community, but the second and third generations that are currently living in the system and being put down for all the things that they're hearing nationally. And so again, just to hear that this is something that you're taking at a very personal level, and that you're supporting all groups and looking into the different lenses that compose what our state is huge. And that representation is something that our Latino community needs, is someone who is actually stopping to think about not only, what the greater Minnesota needs and what the cities need and what the urban areas need, but also what is the composition of our state as a whole, and how do we address the issues that the minorities are going through and struggling with nowadays. So again, as far as representation, I feel like that is a huge need for our communities.
Absolutely. Right. So I've been confronted with what I would do if a fellow legislator, lobbyist, someone I hear in the Capitol, is denying that racism exists. And in 2020, and with everything happening, I am shocked that that still happens, and it happens every single day. We have heard candidates say it of all levels, commissioner all the way up to president. And it's shocking. It is shocking to me. We don't get to tell someone else what their lived experience is. So when someone is bold and brave enough to come out and tell us what their lived experience is, we got to take them, at face value. That is what it is. And how can we help, instead of arguing, well, that wasn't this, or, telling others, what their experience is. And we've all experienced that. So what I would do if confronted, and when confronted with that situation, is point out stories about where it does exist, things that I have heard, things that I have seen, and elevating those stories again, and also elevating solutions. I'm a kind of aggressive person, and straightforward. I shouldn't say aggressive, straightforward and bold. But I've been taught to, if this is an RPG line, to educate rather than intimidate. So providing solutions and saying, yes, this exists, and here's how we can fix it, and we need you to be a part of it. So more invitations to learn and improve, rather than just like shaming people, because that can get you a little bit, that can't get you all the way, basically. So I want to always strive to share why things that they say or do are harmful, and in what ways that's harmful to people in my community and people in their districts as well. And that's something I'm very committed to doing. All right.
And I get to go first.
Yeah.
I did want to point out, I think it's a wonderful and great response. I do want to highlight something that's very often missed with the Latino community, and it's our vulnerability. sharing stories is a very normative platform that is used in the US when it comes to making a point. And I get it. I totally understand. I get it. And I've done it myself sometimes. I'm guilty of that. But at the same time, there's a huge vulnerability on sharing stories that come from the Latino community, whether it's immigrants, first generation, second generation, or third generation. So I do want to, if I could offer a piece of advice, and I know this is not the place for it, but if I could offer a piece of advice, it would be just to be careful when we're talking about sharing stories on these kinds of situations, just because I know, and very often with the kind of work I do, it is so important to be able to protect the people who are being victimized. It happens very often when we're talking about racism, that we want to put the victim out there and we want to make sure that everybody knows what they went through and how they suffered and how that person damaged your life. But at the same time, we need to understand that they're hurting and that there's a bigger impact, especially when it comes to talking about, again, specifically to the Latino community or the immigrant community. If someone is on the street being shamed for speaking a different language and they're already suffering that racism, they're also carrying that cultural background, their families are suffering from it. The community as a whole is suffering from it. And when we highlight them and we put them in public, we could make this even worse for them. So highlighting the stories is a great idea. It's how we highlight them and how much we allow that vulnerability to serp through, to show to the community without causing harm, where I would just draw the line. And I usually when I talk to people about this stuff and I highlight a story, I keep it very, very broad. And I mean, do they have the right to know the story? Yes. Do they have the right to know the details? Do I have the right to put a person up in the stand when they've already been damaged and hurt? Probably not. So if there's anything you could take away from this, by all means. But I did want to highlight that the vulnerability of the victims is something that we very often oversee when it comes to talking about racism and talking about the damage that it has caused. We are very often are so focused on like righting the wrong that we don't take time to think about how righting the wrong is going to affect the person who is being hurt right now.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, Amanda?
Well, I wanted to piggyback on you, Gracie, and ask a question if you're willing to answer. From your perspective, would you say that racism should be approached differently when looking at the Latino and the immigrant community as opposed to what you're seeing in the Black community? Just your personal thoughts on that, because I think that would be really helpful and also helpful to share for those watching and for you, Addie, like to hear that. So centering around the victim is all of my work for the Black voice, right? But of course, that's null and void, even though there are Black immigrants, right? But even atypically, we are not experiencing the like intense fixation as the Latino community is experiencing in terms of immigration. And so I was just wondering, oh, did you freeze, Gracia? Oh, there you go. I thought maybe you froze, Gracia. So I didn't know if you wanted to speak to that really quick, and then I had like another sentence to add, and then we can go on. Oh.
No, we might have lost her.
We might have lost her. Oh. Are you back?
I'm back. I can't believe I lost connection at the pivotal point, right? Of course.
How it always happens.
Yep. Classic.
Okay. Did you hear my question? Like in differentiating between the two from your perspective? Oh, no.
Oh my gosh.
Bummer.
My connection is still unstable.
Okay.
Oh.
I know. Well, here, I won't leave it to you then. I will just say that I do think we can. Sorry. I was going to start talking, but you're like obviously not able to.
Oh man, we need that broadband upgrade. I'm not ever going to stop talking about it until this stuff doesn't happen anymore.
You're like, put me in the office, better internet.
Yeah, for real.
You're like, let's get this started on day one, okay? Like,
Yeah.
Accessibility. Well, I don't want to belabor the point, but I do think there is a difference, and it sounds like you're willing and interested in pursuing that difference and sharing of the stories, which means you would have stories to share, which means you have personal relationships with each community represented that you represent. And so, yeah, that was just my big piggyback, is that when we're talking about the racism topic, it affects communities differently, which adds a nuance to how people representing us as a whole need to approach the topic from each time. I know that there would be blind spots if I was in your position, Addie, in terms of what is affecting the Latino community, just because I don't represent that community. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something that I have noticed good representatives being intentional about building those relationships and reaching out, and not just putting it, on the, I always say posse, on the posse community to do the work and do the outreach and show, representatives how to operate and how to fix things, but seeking out those solutions and seeking out those nuances. Something that I'm committed to do. Even if I don't exactly know how to do it, I know that I can figure it out. I know that I can reach out to folks and figure it out and be intentional about it. So we're getting a couple comments or questions in the comments. Great discussion. I'm learning a lot about racism right here in Carver County. Yep, me too. And I had a phenomenal conversation with back in early June, I believe, with Shanika Chambers and Dante Hughes, and they shared some stories that I was shocked to hear. And it does exist right here in our community. So thank you for acknowledging that, Rebecca. Nancy, we'll come back to that question at the end there. So how will I engage folks in and represent people in my district in the state Senate when I realize that my colleagues around me are not very self-aware? Carver County is always going to be my top priority, and that's everybody here, no exceptions. Not, put party politics aside, put everything else aside. Every single person here without exception is my priority. So I'm always going to strive to conduct myself in a way that makes the district proud, whether that be, being courageous when it is hard to be, fair and honest representation, and actively working towards the best solution. I never want to let you guys down, my community down. I'm doing this for everyone here, and will always try to conduct myself in a way that makes you all proud as well. Little short one there. If you guys want to add anything to that.
Just that I appreciate it, and I think even speaking to that party piece, I think it's hard to have personal views and then want to run and represent a larger sum, and to have people feel comfortable and safe. And so, obviously, actions speak louder than words, and as long as you are committed to that, that's really cool.
Definitely. You back with us? Can you hear us now, Grecia?
Yes, I think
Okay.
I think I'm good. If y'all can hear me.
Yes, we're good.
Okay. So yeah, I'm same with Amanda. I don't think there's a whole lot to add other than, just knowing that you are already looking into understanding the different diverse communities that we have has been already a huge step. Being a part of this community for 20 years, and over the past 20 years, having very few people reach out to us when they run for office has been, this has been really different than any other campaign I've seen before, other than maybe 2 or 3.
Good.
Anyway, so, and like you said, I just reaching out when you acknowledging that you don't have all the answers, and reaching out to the rest of the community to look for those answers is, just kudos to you. And I do see that the community is here to support when that is being asked of them.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, thank you. you know what, my younger self would have never admitted that I was ever wrong. So we've come a long way. All right. So, sorry, I'm in the wrong place in my notes here. I just wanted to touch on kind of something I've learned throughout the year on what systemic racism means. So we know, the traditional examples of blatant racism, but what does systemic racism mean? It was honestly not something I had really ever heard of. We didn't talk about it in law school. I never heard about it in my little college in Missouri. So this is something that's a relatively new conversation, I think, for a lot of folks. I was not aware of it in the extent that it truly, truly exists and has for decades in housing, in education, in access to healthcare, mental health services, everything, really. And I've learned so much throughout this whole year, and campaigning has just given me an even greater view of that, of how truly deep that systemic racism runs. And I'm able to now kind of realize my privilege within that and potentially my ability to change those things. And I care so deeply about this community and Carver County, and believe that everybody here should feel welcomed and cared for. I don't think that I'm going to be, the one to go in and fix everything and change everything, but realizing that it exists so deeply and seeing how I specifically can adjust or affect things here in our community. A great example is trying to work with local law enforcement and local community groups. I think all of us need to be at the table for that conversation and continuing to push our local law enforcement to make those necessary improvements that they've been talking about trying to make. It's not quite going to be enough to just engage the community and have those discussions, but like you guys said, put your money where your mouth is, basically. So when we're talking about getting funding for body cams, yes, let's do it. When we're talking about putting more crisis counselors on dispatch with law enforcement, yes, let's do that. So always something that I'm going to be striving to do, and especially in like housing and education, all of this underbelly of systemic racism that we need to acknowledge and know how to fix and learn how to fix.
Gracie, I'll go quick because I have a question that's burning inside of me. So how would you identify systemic racism? So would the communities come to you, like, and if we contacted you, you would support us to identify if there's a law that you would need to maybe place a little focus on and try to get some people advocating for changes so that the community can feel like they're being heard? Or would it be getting us resources so that we can make complaints to the right departments? Like, could you kind of share a little bit on how we would on-ramp to making you more involved with what we feel is systemic racism in this area?
Yeah, both. Great question. Both answers, yes. A lot of my current job is providing people with resources so they can direct their question to the right person. So that's something I'm always going to continue to be doing, and I want to make sure everyone knows who to call when there's an issue, and I always want to have my door open for everybody, regardless of if I agree with you, disagree with you, whatever it might be. I don't know that things exist unless I actively look for it or someone tells me. So I need to have both kind of lines of communication and discovery going all the time. So I consistently give out my cell phone number, and I will give it at the end of this call as well. And I want anyone to call it. It's the same number that my friends call me on. I want my constituents and everyone here to feel welcome to call me and tell me this is not okay. How do we fix it? I'm probably not going to know the way to fix it all of the time, but I will know who to go to find out and ask, and who to, kind of rally behind those changes that we need to make. I will say too that the Posse Caucus has laid a bunch of groundwork in all of the special sessions and the end of the last session to get legislators thinking about those existing issues. And we need to build off of that and continue to build off of that and never let up on that conversation. I'm fortunate to have built up great relationships with a lot of folks in that caucus, and I'm really excited to partner with them to continue driving for what's right.
Yeah, because I feel like as someone who experienced systemic racism and like a basic human right, like education, I felt very, very lonely not being able to know who would have my back, spent hours and hours trying to contact people. Oftentimes people would tell me, contact this person, you contact that person. They're like, well, I really can't do anything here, but if you contact this person and you send them an email. I ended up sharing my story like 17 times. I'm not trying to make it a sad story. I'm just articulating that it sometimes is really hard if there's not like a centralized approach. And so just like hearing that, that things are happening, and even you sharing that there were some things that happened that were shocking to you, I bet you would get more access to that information. I know I wouldn't have texted you if I wouldn't have gotten to know you first, and everybody's personality is different, right? But if we are understanding what someone would be doing for us, hands down, I would have called you during that time, or whoever is in office.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it goes the same with, well, slightly different with the Latino community. I think one of the biggest issues with systemic racism, again, focusing on the immigrant community and the community who is vulnerable, is very often when we experience racism or systemic racism, there's this giant fear of the repercussions of stating that we've been targeted. And so it just goes under the table and nobody looks at it. And if somebody is willing to speak about it, there's a lot of repercussions. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you stories, but has been a very normative part of my life over the last 15 years. Every time that I point something out that is systemically racist towards the minorities or towards the Latino community, it's hit back. And so just knowing that it's not only going to be heard about, or that you're willing to not just listen about it, but also direct us to the right resources and work with us. And I think that's the biggest part, is you acknowledging that you are willing to work with us to correct the wrongs. It's huge, because very often we hear, I'll just give you to the right, point you in the right direction. We'll have somebody look at it. We'll, take a look and see if we can do something about it. It's usually the runaround is, and what it sounds to me like is, I can't do anything about it and I'm not willing to. And so I'm just going to push you over to the next person, and hopefully that'll give you enough for you to be happy with me and you can move along. And so to hear that not only are you willing to listen to your constituents, but also to work with a plan, to come up with, like you said, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to look into where those answers are. And that's already a step above and beyond what I've seen the last couple of years.
Good. That makes me really angry that you've had to deal with not that level of care. It's really aggravating for me to, in my current position as a staffer, to have to pass the buck. And I am consistently always following up, like, okay, well, this person wrote in from a community that this person doesn't represent. So here is, this situation. What do you need my help with? And consistently following up. Did they get what they need? Are they okay now? When it's not necessarily my job. So as a legislator, you have the even higher level of authority to continue following up and making sure that that was handled the way it should have been. And there's always ways to help, even if it's something like immigration. The state Senate has nothing to do with immigration. That's a fallacy that a lot of people like to use as a talking point. But we do have a role in protections and accessibility to things. And that's something that a state senator always needs to be cognizant of, is how they can affect that situation, and not just throw up their hands and say, I can't do anything. That's not my style anyway. So, all right, we got a couple questions here. Okay, one, could the state of Minnesota done a better job acknowledging that COVID-19 affects people of color in a disproportionate way? 100%. Yes, absolutely. It's the same with, when we're talking about pollution, for example. Communities of color tend to live closer to environmental hazards. That's not talked about enough. Maternal death rates in women of color, like especially Black women, that is not talked about enough and not addressed enough. So yeah, absolutely, that could have been handled a lot better. And that response, when we actually get a vaccine and we get a treatment, needs to have that equity lens, needs to have that priority lens. It's not just, we can't prioritize other communities, you know, that aren't being as affected, I think. So great question, Nancy. All right. Someone said, I love that. We need more politicians that listen, not lecture. Yes, 100%. I always say if a legislator comes in and says that they have all the answers, they're not telling you the truth. So.
You know what I love about your COVID-19 response is because it's relevant to my personal experience right now, being a product of predominantly rural suburbs personally growing up. There's always this idea of a bubble, like we are separate from what we're seeing on the news, like that's like worlds away. We don't experience that, and we're experiencing that now. I mean, I live in Chanhassen, and no one in my neighborhood walks around with a mask on. There's been social gatherings since the day we shut down, and there's nowhere to articulate how that's putting people in harm's way. And so there's only been like 3 or 4 neighbors that we are very serious about the COVID-19 regulations. And so we allow our children to play together. And then that also gives us a stigma in the community, like, oh, they're being like, you know, cliquey, and they're only willing to do this. And like the kids are running up and you're like training your children, be like, no, thank you, we can't play, you know, like Majimbo, I wouldn't invite you over, but you know, pandemic. Yeah. So anyway, like it's just been one of those things where it's been really hard. So I appreciate the question, Nancy. And I think even though I am not immersed in a minority population region, I still feel as a Black woman very connected to my community. And so my motivation to wear a mask is even bigger than what just affects me. And I'm excited to hear, Addie, that you are dedicated to that kind of representation too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And I think for the Latino community, the equity piece is so important. Very often we have a large part of our community who is working jobs that do not offer insurance, health insurance. And very often we find grown-ups, I mean, usually we are able to enroll children into the Minnesota healthcare program, which is wonderful, but then you have parents and grandparents living at the house who are not able to get medical care. And so when we are living in a community where wearing a face mask is not taken seriously, and there's a virus that, you know, gets passed from child to child at school because children have to attend school, and all of a sudden, you know, someone caught it in the bus and the kids get sick, and then the parents get sick, and then the grandparents get sick. And so not only do they not have access to healthcare, they don't have access to getting a test done because it's expensive and you have to pay out of pocket. They don't have the ability to take sick days because their work does not provide for sick days, or they're not able to get those sick days. They're not able to tap into county resources or state resources because they don't have a social security to attach to a petition. And so all of these things just snowball into this huge hurdle that our community is being affected by, that all of a sudden you have families who are in debt, families who, you know, they're not going to get evicted because of the order, but that doesn't mean that their debt is not increasing, and all of a sudden they owe 3 or 4 months of rent. All of a sudden they're back on like 3 or 4 months of their electricity bill being paid or their heating bill being paid. And so all of these things, I guess, they cause a huge snowball effect for our communities that aren't even beginning to scratch the surface. Because on top of that, you have mental health. There is very little mental health that is being provided for the community of color that is culturally competent. That's one. And then on top of that, you add the fact that we have zero, let me say that again, we have 0 therapists who speak the language. So we don't have anyone who speaks Spanish, who speaks Somali, who speak Russian, which are like 3 very predominant languages spoken in our county. And there is no one looking into it. There's no one looking into what can we do to support our families who are in need with mental health. And so, like I said, equity is a huge word that has been thrown out there, but very few people seem to understand the actual impact it has in our community. Equity does not mean everybody gets to be tested for COVID. Those people who don't have access to it through their healthcare are able to do it without thinking of how the heck they're going to pay for it. Or being able to say everyone who does end up being sick is able to get resources at home to make sure that they're financially stable without having to think about whether they have a social security or not, whether they are able to get state insurance or not, whether they're able to get sick days or not. That is equity to me. And it might not seem like a huge deal for some people, but when you're living in a community who is working and living check by check, who is providing for their family the best way they can, and then they don't have the ability to access all the resources, I'm seeing it daily. And, it's just, there's not enough being done. So equity, huge word.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I'm disgusted at how it was weaponized during the referendum battle. So there's a lot of public education that needs to be done around what that actually means and how that plays into our communities and our processes. We're getting a lot of thank yous in the comments. I just want to pass that on to you both. Mary asked a great question. If I am planning to stand with driver's licenses for all, that's a long, very complicated conversation I would love to have with you. The answer is yes, of course, absolutely. I'm shocked that it didn't get done in the first place, but yeah, I'm welcoming that conversation with you, Mary. I would love to talk about that. All right, last question that came in, and we can kind of tie it into our last point here, is what kind of anti-racism measures we need to see here in Carver County. And I'm going to tie that into what I'm planning to do, my promise for this community. So right here in Carver County, we've said systemic racism and blatant racism exists. It still happens. So my role in that is to continue facilitating those conversations on educating the public, educating especially people in positions of power who are actively denying it or are choosing to put their heads in the sand. So continuing to bring folks together and facilitate those conversations, taking a really bold step in local law enforcement. I think the tides are kind of starting to turn, and our local law enforcement is starting to make steps to improve. But a state senator can definitely help with that a lot, facilitating those conversations and getting funding for things like body cams or crisis counselors. My role with the Higher Education Committee, I was able to work on a bill called the Teachers of Color Act. And it was a great step, super great step in the higher education space to incentivize teachers of color candidates. So things like loan forgiveness or kind of free tuition, free classes, that kind of thing, and more incentivizing on going to communities where they're needed. I did not realize how huge of a problem that is, that our kids don't often have teachers that look like them. And they learn better when they do. So that is something I'm committed to doing, furthering, not only for higher education, but for K-12 as well. And access to healthcare and mental health, just like you said, Grecia, that's a huge, huge part of my platform, and that applies to everyone. So, getting therapists who do speak the language out here where folks need it. Something I'm definitely going to prioritize. The last kind of three things we'll loop together. Actively seeking out to keep improving myself and my understanding of it. Just continuing to find ways to continue my learning and my journey. Again, actively looking at each bill through an equity lens and working with the Posse Caucus and working with everyone I possibly can. I talk a lot about bringing the experts to the table so we can come up with the best solution possible. And my job is to make space at that table for that to happen and elevate those in my district who are leading the way on these issues and doing so in a way that is culturally competent and protective of the stories and nuanced as I need to be. So that is my promise to my community. I don't know if you guys want to add. I know we're a little bit over time, so add anything you want to.
Yeah, thanks for staying a little later with us. My promise is as long as I am a resident of the great Carver County area, that you will hear from me or anybody that I get the pleasure of representing. I wear a lot of hats in this county. And so as we cheer and hope and cross our fingers and whatever you believe in that you get into office. Just knowing that if something comes across my table in my launch lens that's focused around housing equity, but as well as that intersection of the disproportionately affected youth of color, as well as ROAR, which is that education environment. I would absolutely love to hear details of your hopes to bring counseling equity. That is something that I pushed in the district, and I will still continue to try to as I'm pursuing my own clinical psychology degree. And then last but not least, just as being a citizen here, a mom who is trying to live and enjoy and be able to bring my full self, I am excited, and my promise to you, if you get into that position, is to tie you in on some of that stuff and give you a chance to show us what you're gonna do. And it doesn't look like you're afraid of that. Like I said, I cut it straight. And so if someone does something, I congratulate them and tell them thank you. If they don't do anything, I don't. I'm not really one of those people that highlights when someone really doesn't, but I'm also not gonna lie for them. So if someone says, Addie, she does all this, and I'm like, actually, Addie didn't do any of that. Just knowing that that's the straight shooter I'm gonna be in our relationship, but I'm really excited to give you a try.
Good, thank you. I really appreciate that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up this conversation. I think it's a huge, like I said, 20 years, and this has been the year that's actually been spoken about, but gotta start somewhere, right? And I think more than anything, I'd like to say I'm committed. Latino Voices is committed to honoring and lifting the Latino community that has been overseen for many, many years. And so my commitment is, whether you win the election or not, to work with you. I am committed to bring these issues up to you very often. I will be honest, they will be mostly anonymous, but that is my role in the community. My role in the community has been to be that person that brings forth the issues that our community feels vulnerable to speak on. And so you might not hear full stories, but just know that those issues are very real and they are harming our community. And so again, I'm committed to bring them up to you and to hold you accountable to work with us on getting those answers and working towards creating a better Carver County and a better future for our community.
Absolutely. I really, really appreciate that. And that holding us accountable piece needs to be across the board for sure. And more representatives need to be willing to do that and be open to being wrong and being educated and always striving to do better. And I am committed to that. So thank you both so much for being here and donating your time and your expertise and your experiences. I can't tell you how much we appreciate it. This is such an important conversation for our community to continue to have. So this is kind of step one of that. So I appreciate it. And thank you guys. And thanks everyone who watched. This video will be up on YouTube as quick as I can get it there. So have a great rest of your Sunday, everybody. Thanks.